Paul has brought with us, brought to today's interview some photographs and videos from his time in Afghanistan, flying missions and so on, that he'd like to share with us, to give us an absolute vivid picture of what it's like to be there in a helicopter. Paul, you can tell us how this was shot and...
Okay, this video is it's a mission we were on, right there you're hearing the Apache pilots talk. We were on a QRF mission, called Quick Reaction Force. Means you're on call to pick up somebody, so we got a call, hey, there's a Special Forces ODA team out that need to get extracted. So we went out with 2 Chinooks and an Apache. The video is from the Apache gun camera. They went after the mission, they gave me the video later, that's how I got the video. So right now, what we're trying to do, because it's on a real steep ridge line, we were trying to pick off these Special Forces troops, and it was tough to try to land. One of the aircraft went in, couldn't quite get down, so then the next time I went in, I was lucky enough to get it down, and that'll come up here in a second. There's a little bit of that. Like I say, the voice you're hearing is the Apache gun crew talked about, because they're like, you know, okay, anticipate, hey, what are we gonna do? We're gonna land in the wind, how are we gonna do this? Because one aircraft took off, they left, I said, okay, I'll give it a try. I come in, and pretty soon, hey, you'll see me coming in to give it a shot.
Just keep going.
Because you don't see, there's another Apache up there. They're up about, you know, a couple thousand feet above us, orbiting, looking for bad guys around.
Snipers and...
Because the night before, when they inserted these troops, the Chinooks got shot at. Okay, here it is. I believe this is me now. I'm just starting to land on the ridgeline to pick up the troops, and then you can see here in a second, you can see the troops getting on. What it is, we call it a 2-wheel pinnacle landing. The area wasn't wide enough to put all 4 gear down, so I had just the back gear on the ridgeline, and the forward gear are hanging out over the over the mountain.
Oh my!
And you can see that there. You can see how the front gear are up in the air.
Look at that! Oh my goodness, that's incredible. And so you're picking up both American forces and also.
It was American Forces, it was an ODA team, Special Forces team. They also work with partner Afghan National Army troops.
Yeah.
And in this period, we actually pick up some prisoners there also.
That's a pretty shot right there. Look at that. Oh man, that's great. Where you work? Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I dig.
Now, what kind of, when you are going to take off again, what kind of thrust and power is going to put you back up?
Well, there's quite a bit of power in a Chinook. That's why one of the reasons we were flying Chinooks were so valuable in this mission. We could fly up higher, and that's pretty much it there, so I'll just kill that.
Okay. Can you tell folks about what the geography, what Afghanistan is like? From as a helicopter pilot, and you know, as someone who's in a mission in that country.
Very challenging for a helicopter pilot. It's a rugged terrain. Like I was telling you earlier, it borders Iran on one side, Pakistan on the other. North is even China, Turkmenistan, whatnot. But there's an offshoot from the Himalayan mountains, the Hindu Kush, that comes into the center of Afghanistan. So the center of Afghanistan is very mountainous, very rugged terrain. And then as you come out of the steep mountains, it's still a rugged terrain, but it's even more like a desert environment too, so it's like high altitudes, but yet desert environment, very dusty, tough to operate helicopters in. Because high altitudes, the higher you go with a helicopter, the more power it takes, the less people you can put on board, so it starts to get a lot more challenging. And in the dusty environment is real challenging. I mean, they damaged crashed numerous aircraft, and we used to call them brownout landings.
Wow, that must be. And how about when camps and bases were set up? You were in Kandahar and you were in Bagram and so on. getting the equipment and supplies and so on, that was part of,
Right, that's what we,
Yeah.
Afghanistan, as you heard, recent news, is a landlocked country, so everything came in, all the resupplies, troops, equipment, food came in via airplanes. Usually they came in a couple of the big airfields, usually it was Kandahar or Bagram or
Yeah.
Kabul, the capital. We usually work between Bagram and Kandahar. But then there was a network of what we call FOBs, forward operating bases, and that's where units would get located, and then they'd start to go out and work in the remote areas and, interact with the locals and, try to go after and find the bad guys.
Yeah.
But what we used to do, there's two main missions for the helicopters. We used to call them direct support or general support. Direct support mission is when you were taking US and/or Afghan troops on a combat mission. You were taking troops, they were going out, we were landing them, and they were going out looking for the bad guys essentially for a mission. A general support mission is when we were resupplying the FOBs, because like I say, everything came in by plane,
Yeah.
but then it had to go out to the FOBs, and you didn't want to drive it. One, it was very few roads, very rugged roads for what, and then there was all kinds of IEDs, and it was very hazardous on the road and very long lengths of time. If you drove, I think the one paved road there was from Kandahar to Bagram. Like from Kandahar to, was it one of the places we used to be, Ghazni? I think if you tried to drive it, it would take like days,
wow.
but we could fly there in an hour and a half. So the GS missions where we would take all the supplies and bring them out to the FOBs, the forward operating bases, that would be food, water, ammo, additional people, whatnot, mail, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever it was.
How, mail is it, how did you connect with Kathy and the girls while you were there?
Well, that's what it was. It was two different times too. When I was
Yeah.
in my first deployment, 03, 04, right after we invaded
Yeah.
Afghanistan pretty much, there was no cell phones, there was no Skype. So the way I talked, usually we coordinate a phone call. We had a tent, that they had phone number, they had phone banks,
Yeah.
like probably 10 helicopters in this big GP medium, we call it, I had 10 phones. And I would call, actually, Connecticut was very helpful. We'd call a phone number, a toll-free number in Connecticut, the National Guard, and they would put us through.
Oh, good.
But you had to account for, I think it's a weird, 9.5 hour time
Yeah,
difference. So
so-
we usually tried to coordinate to call at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas my second deployment to Iraq was a little bit different, but then later my third deployment to Afghanistan again was 12, 13. And that was people had cell phones, they had Skype. So people were, Skyping their families
Yeah.
every night,
Yeah.
as long as you had the internet access. And usually if you had a bigger fob where the aircraft were, usually you had that kind of access.
That's incredible that there was internet access, isn't it?
It was much later in the
No,
war, like we're
it's-
talking from 03
Yeah,
to then to
yeah,
2012,
yeah.
almost 10 years. But then, because the internet exploded and that was a big need, but it helped families to
Yeah.
stay together.
Yeah.
It was nice, you could talk, and see visual pictures
Yeah.
almost every,
Yeah,
So that's how we used to stay together.
that's amazing,
Because
amazing.
my wife says I wasn't much of a letter writer, and I must say I'm not, so I tried to call as often as I could.
This is, that's wonderful. We, right now Afghanistan and are leaving after all that, 20 years and so on is in the news. What do you want people to understand that they may not be aware of from your time there?
I would guess some people think, do you think your time was wasted, all the service members that were killed or injured? I don't look at it as like that. We went in for a specific mission. I mean, back right after 2001, when the towers came down, which actually I flew to New York on 2001. We learned that Bin Laden was in Afghanistan. A lot of the training facilities were there. A lot of the command and control planning was there.
Yeah.
So I always thought going into Afghanistan was a good idea. The only problem with Afghanistan, it's a very poor country. People don't realize it was so poor. I mean, we used to routinely fly around. You'd fly over people living in tents with goats in tents like they did 5,000 years ago. It's a very poor country, very little running water, very little electricity. Plus it's very tribal. There's different tribes, Pashtun, Tajik, and they used to say, I read a book on it when I was there just to find out a little more about it. When Afghans, the only time they're not fighting amongst themselves is when they're fighting an outside force, going back to like the days of Genghis Khan.
Yeah,
I mean, that was one thing that was interesting too, when we used to fly around, used to call it the old British fort from back in the 1800s, you know, in charge of the Light Brigade
right,
days.
oh, right, yeah.
There was a British fort, we landed in it one time just to try, it was old, abandoned and
Yeah.
whatnot, but it was, you could see the fortifications, so there was some interesting parts, but we ended up being there, then it turned into, we quickly, you know, took over the country, stabilized it, and then it would turn into a nation building exercise, and unfortunately, over the next 20 years, Afghanistan couldn't, you know, sustain itself. The one I think people don't realize is, I mean, the metropolitan areas, if you wanna call it that, like say, Kandahar is one of them. Kandahar, it's just a series of mud huts, so there's a lot more of them. There's very few multi-story buildings. Most of the population in the cities that's what you saw on TV recently.
Yeah.
But I'd say the good 70% of the population out in the rural area probably doesn't even know this is going on.
Yeah.
They're still living like it's, you know, in the
And
18th
because
century.
of the mountains and valleys and harshness of the landscape, does that cements the tribal nature of
Yeah,
the
exactly,
population?
exactly. And
Because they don't travel and meet
Right.
one another.
so I thought what we went over there for, I thought was a good idea. Staying there, trying to get the Afghans to, you know, survive on their own. It was tried, it didn't work. I feel bad for some of the Afghan people, especially the Afghan women,
Yeah,
who, I mean, under the Taliban rule, like when I was over there the first time, they blew up a girls' school and whatnot. It's gotta be very rough. You feel bad for leaving, but there's a point where, okay, if we stay, like some people have said, okay, we leave a minimum force in there. Well, you probably have to have at least 5,000 to 10,000 people in there, and if you get US forces in there, they're gonna be a target. People are gonna get shot, people are gonna get killed.
yeah.
How long are you willing to accept that? Because I think in Afghanistan, you could be there another 10 years, and the same thing is gonna happen. It was, I don't look at it as our time was wasted. We went in there for a good reason. We were trying to do the right thing. And the way I look at it is I think most served people in the military, maybe not all, is I'm a cog in a big machine. My job, was, flying helicopters. Our big thing was time on target. If I got people in the right place at the right time, I did my job. If my job was done right, then it allowed other people to do their job right. Hopefully everybody survived the mission. That's what when you're in the military, you're doing it for the guys, around you. So I feel bad about the way we left, but if we had remained there, I wouldn't have been upset with it. But the same token, people are like, well, how long are we gonna send people over there and get killed? So the fact that we left, I'm not upset with that, but, I feel bad about, it's gonna be tough for the Afghan people.
Yeah. There's no black and white. There's just so many layers of.
It's another world. People, like I said, when I came back the first time, people are like, oh, what'd you do when you weren't flying? Did you go to the mall? And I'm like, there is no mall. You don't go outside the wire, we call it, without body armor and, weapons and whatnot. So they don't realize how poor a country it is and how rough a way of life over it is. It's very dangerous, even in peaceful times.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big reason people don't understand what's going on. It's just, unless you've been there, and I didn't really even interact with the people that much. I was, flying, I had some interaction. I had 2 Afghan rugs in my house
right.
that I bought from locals. They used to come outside the fob on weekends, and they would sell their wares.
And so that's, what were your barracks like, or your living quarters like? Was it different from the first time and the second time?
Yeah, all 3 were slightly different.
Okay.
The first one, I lived in a tent with 12 other guys for a year. 8 guys, because we were one officer, so we got a few less. Some guys were 12 to 16.
Okay.
So you had a cot, you had a little section we were in. I lived in a tent on the fob. And then because that's right after we first got there, there was nothing built up. But then over the years, they started building up. And in my Iraq deployment, they had these things called CHUs, container housing units.
Okay.
Basically, it was a metal box that you lived in.
Okay.
Which the good thing about that is they could attach an air conditioning unit to the side, so it was nice. Because in Iraq, When I was there, was it 9/10, Chinooks only flew at night. Chinooks were a big target, so we only flew at night, tougher to shoot at you if they can't see you. The one funny story I tell about Iraq though is what I got upset with is one time they blew up my air conditioner. So they used to, like when you're living in a fob, they used to sometimes they have indirect fire come in, mortars, stuff like that. They would launch them in. Well, one day they launched it in, they hit the generator that was powering my air conditioner. So I woke up in the middle of the afternoon because I was flying nights and I was sweating. I was like, what happened? They blew up my air conditioner.
No. Oh my God. And what about rations? How, water?
Again, it varied from the first deployment to the last. The first deployment, we lived in a tent. We ate MREs for lunch, meals ready to eat. That's like, meal that comes in a plastic bag essentially. And then usually one meal, they try to have a hot meal, but it was still pretty canned. It came in bigger tins. They just served it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't bad. And then later on, like in Iraq, and then the second deployment in Afghanistan, when they started bringing contractors in, stuff like that, they built hard buildings, and they had contractors come in. And actually, my last deployment was, we were assigned to Terran Kaut. It was an Australian fob, mainly run by the Australians, and they had some great food. It had some great stuff, so it wasn't bad at all.
Cool. How long was each deployment?
The first deployment was 14 months, because that's before they started realizing what it was if you understand the National Guard, in aviation at least, probably 20 or 30% of the guys were full-time like me, trained in the part-time, but the part-time guys leave businesses, leave school, so, I mean, a lot of times they realize, hey, we're pulling this, you might be a key person in a business, and the business is like, hey, we're trying to be patriotic, we're trying to help you, but we need somebody to do this guy's job, so what they did was the Department of Defense shortened National Guard deployments to 12 months to include the MOB process. What the National Guard troops, we have to use to go through a MOB process, mobilization, where we do some additional training on the front end, and then we get evaluated, and then we get over. That was usually, give or take, 2 months, 2 to 3 months. So then we would be what we call downrange for 9 to 10 months, depending on how long the MOB process. So usually the deployment altogether from the day you leave to the day you come back is roughly a year. Although the first one was 14 months because that process wasn't in there. We just kept getting extending. To then, as the wars went on, it was mostly National Guard was about a year, and then active duty did the same thing, but they didn't have they did their MOB processes essentially at their home station, and they went over for pretty much the same length of time, 9 months or so.
Now, certainly, I know like during the Vietnam War, in a year deployment, troops would get a week of R&R. Was that ever available in those deployments?
The first deployment I did, I was able to come home for a short period of time because we were there for over a year. We were there 14 months, total. We were there just over a year, but 14-month total deployment. But when they did shorten the deployments, that was the bad thing. We didn't always get I was able, in Iraq, I was able to come home for a short time. But my last deployment in Afghanistan, you didn't come home and say, hey, we you're here 9 months, we can't afford to send people home. There was exceptions, maybe if somebody like their son or daughter was graduating from high school, getting married, a big event, they tried to work with you. The military is pretty good about that, but there was no guarantee you were gonna come home.
All right, when people say to you, Paul Melanson, thank you for your service, how do you react to that?
I appreciate it very much. I try to I remember once I was in Dunkin' Donuts, and this kid came up to me, little kid. He's with his father, and he's like, he wants to buy my coffee. I'm like, no, you don't have to do that. So I was like, nah, he wants to do it. I'm like, all right, I appreciate it. I said, how about this? You ever been on an Army helicopter? And it was right outside Bradley where we were, so I took him over, and we gave him a tour of the helicopters he sat in and stuff like that. So I try to pay it back a little bit if I can.
Oh my goodness, that you made his day.
But I'm very appreciative, especially because I was too young to see the Vietnam War, but I was old enough to realize what went on. And in my early days in the Army, I served with a lot of Vietnam vets, and I knew what it was like for them. It was brutal coming back. I mean, one of the stories guys told me, they got off the plane in California, they take their uniforms off so they wouldn't get spit on and whatnot. And So I'm glad that the country has turned that corner. I mean, even, I've had people come up to me and say, I don't agree with the war, I don't agree why you're over there, but I appreciate
Yeah.
your service. So it's a lot better now, and I appreciate it.
Good. Paul, thank you. Anything else you want folks to know?
No, I can't think of anything right now. Just support the military like I think most people do. It's not for everybody. I've enjoyed it. It's been hard on the family, but I think we're better off for it. And I enjoy my flying career. And right now I gotta go find a job. I'm retired. I'm playing a lot of golf.
This is good. This is good. Thank you, Paul Melanson. I appreciate this.
Lynn, no problem. I appreciate it.
Okay. We'll turn this off.